Are you convinced by what the Prime Minister has said, or do you think that there is no way now that Afghans who are very loyal to the British troops, who are now in peril, are going to be able to get safe passage out?
Well, on the operational side, I was pleased to hear the Prime Minister confirm every effort is being made to help those who still want to get out to depart. There are at-risk Afghans which we weren't able to help during that evacuation, that incredible effort made by our armed forces. But as you touch on, there will be veterans and families, indeed the wider public, asking, what was it all for? The Prime Minister acknowledged the world is very much more a dangerous place now as terrorist organizations return to Afghanistan. But this time we lose sight of the threat picture, and the country is back in the hands of a dictatorship. And of course, the people of Afghanistan are now facing a humanitarian disaster. So it's raised some very awkward strategic questions for Britain, for the West, and so forth, particularly with America now adopting a more isolationist policy.
Yeah, where does the buck stop with this? Is this simply down to the fact that, you know, we don't have a big enough military now to be able to remain in Afghanistan alone? So when Biden decided he was going to stick with Trump's date and get the American troops out, that we had no choice? Or do you think that we should have done more, or at least tried to do more?
There are very much. You're absolutely right to question our hard power. And what we saw there is the requirement of how conventional forces are so important. We're cutting back on the size of our army, and yet look what the Paras did in order to get people out. Boots on the ground absolutely count. We're cutting back on our strategic airlift, our big RAF aircraft. They proved absolutely credible to be able to make this operation work. But the bigger question is more to do with leadership. And that's usually what Britain is good at. There is a void in leadership, both in the West and particularly in NATO. And our adversaries, particularly China, Russia, and Iran, will take full advantage of that. The point I made in the chamber today is to say Britain should apply to, fill that void. It's what we do. When America steps back, it's normally Britain that actually steps forward. But this would require a complete overhaul of how Whitehall does business, to upgrade our strategic thinking, our foreign policy output, but most critically, the appetite to once again lead alliances, if necessary, without America.
I mean, there's very little appetite from other NATO members to go back into Afghanistan with us. And even though Trump described it as a forever war, I've heard other people use the phrase forever peace, because actually it didn't take a huge troop presence in Afghanistan to maintain the structure that we spent 20 years fighting for. I mean, it wasn't sort of, mature enough to stand on its own 2 feet. But do you think, what do we do now? Because the difficulty we have is with China and Russia in conversations with the Taliban, and even the Taliban now meeting the UN, do we have to now also join the queue to have some sort of dialogue with them, which would have been unconscionable, frankly, mere months ago?
Well, let's take those 2 important questions separately. The latter part, do we need to talk to them? Well, there's 40 million people in Afghanistan. They're going to approach a very difficult winter. The Taliban are not a government in waiting. They don't know how to run a country. They will need international support, particularly from the big UN agencies, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the World Food Programme in particular, to be able to make sure that we do not see famine, starvation, and a humanitarian disaster as the economy begins to collapse. But there's a wider issue here of the United States, because the reason why they chose to depart is because this became, as we know now, a domestic political election issue. Donald Trump saying, I want troops to come home. Only 2,500 of them were there, but they were just doing enough to allow the Afghan forces to keep the Taliban at bay. And when they pulled out, they also pulled out the logistical supply of bullets, of ammunition, which means that the Afghan forces themselves couldn't continue their fight. And when they realized if you have no ammunition, of course you're going to then actually get rid of your uniform and head home to look after your family. And that's why the Taliban were able to rout across the country. It was messy, there's no doubt about it. There were so many things that went wrong. It was elitist, it was corrupt and so forth, but it was heading roughly in the right direction. And now we not only have another dictatorship to handle, we also have terrorism, which I'm afraid I expect will be marked as we approach the 20th anniversary of 9/11 with probably an attack on the West somewhere.
That's really alarming, actually. I was going to ask you about terrorism next, because we know that there are 10 known prescribed terrorist organisations. We've heard reports of around 10,000 foreign fighters flooding into the country. How much do we need to worry here in the UK that reprisals could spill over onto our streets?
You know, every terrorist organisation, every non-state actor, every adversary that dislikes the West, dislikes America, will be buoyed on to see a low-budget insurgency defeat a superpower in this way. We're already seeing a terrible attack in New Zealand. There'll be similar ones, which will be inspired exactly because the Taliban have effectively won, and we've given up and we've retreated. So we're in a very dangerous period right now, made all the worse by the fact, as I said, America is choosing to step back. And of course, separate from Afghanistan, there is a big geopolitical change of power moving from America to China, which militarily, economically, technologically will advance beyond the United States in our lifetimes. We need leadership. And this is why I'm encouraging Britain to recognize what we could do. But right now, we're not in top gear at all. We're in second or third. So much to be done if we want to do what we did a couple of times last century and step forward, build the alliances and show the West the leadership that it requires.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.